Live from downtown Detroit, home of WDIV and Click on Detroit, Local 4 News at noon starts now.
Path of destruction. Tropical storm Isaias leads to tornadoes and dumps heavy rain during its inland march up the East Coast. We're going to take a closer look at the impact.
Here at home, we're watching Storm Tracker 4 as wet weather continues to move through Metro Detroit. Will things be drying out before the end of the day?
And a primary election during a pandemic. We have a look at how voters and officials are navigating these unprecedented times.
Good afternoon. We begin with some big breaking news, a shakeup at Ford.
CEO Jim Hackett, who you will see in just a moment, will retire. Ford Chief Operating Officer Jim Farley will take his place, and that will be effective October 1st. Let's get right out to our Rod Maloney. He joins us now with a closer look at this big change. Rod?
Well, you know, Jim Hackett came to Ford many years ago, about 5 years ago, and found his way to the CEO job about 3 years ago. And he was an outsider, and he was CEO of Steelcase. He had a lot of ties to Silicon Valley, and that was the allure for Bill Ford. But Jim Hackett had to do a big turnaround as most of his tenure. Wall Street hasn't liked the way that's gone. They didn't feel it was quick enough. They didn't feel it was deep enough. And at the same time, Hackett took about the business of trying to sort of change the culture within Ford. And so it is not a surprise today that they go from a guy who was an outsider to a decided insider in the business. That's going to be 58-year-old James D. Farley Jr., who was the grandson of a guy who worked at the Highland Park plant in the early 1900s, and he is quite proud of that family heritage. Jim Farley had a lot of other jobs. He's currently the COO, Chief Operating Officer, but before that he was in charge of new business and technology and strategy. He was the EVP of global markets. Before that, Ford of Europe, worked in a turnaround there, and global marketing and sales before that. So Jim Farley now takes over as the CEO come October, and he has a lot of work ahead of him, but he talked about where Ford is right now and what he thinks is important.
And we're now a more curious and less insular culture today, thanks to Jim Hackett. He has laid a solid foundation for a vibrant future. You know, we know our competition today. It's Amazon, Baidu, Tesla, Apple, Toyota, and others. They're well-financed and voracious companies, and I'm inspired by the positive momentum that we're now building.
Now, Farley talked about a lot of non-automotive companies in there, and that is going to be his challenge, getting the autonomous vehicle, the electric vehicle, the infusion of high technology into cars and moving the company forward. Very difficult job, but it's one that he is clearly suited for. And of course, he's had a lifelong involvement in the industry. He came to Ford from Toyota, where he launched a brand there. And Michelle Krebs, who is the auto trader, auto analyst that we turn to in moments like this, believes that Farley really is the right guy for the job right now.
You know, Jim Farley is a lot about, he understands the story, the emotion around products. If you look at the Ford Bronco, look what that's not out for another year, and look what that's doing. And so he understands that products have to be more than just the product and not be just a commodity. There has to be a story and some emotion around that. And I think that's one of the things he brings to the party.
So what we're going to see now is yet another CEO at Ford Motor Company, and see where he can take the company. Wall Street certainly would like to see him take it in a different direction because the stock price is low. But the belief is that they've got a guy who is young, solid in the industry, and is ready to move forward in what promises to be a tough couple of years looking ahead. So we're going to be talking more about this on Local 4 News at 4, 5, and 6 in terms of what it is that Jim Farley does, where the company goes, and where it has been under Jim Hackett. So for now, reporting live from Dearborn, Rod Maloney, Local 4.
All right, Rod, also breaking, former Michigan State gymnastics coach Kathy Klages learned her sentence today in connection to the Larry Nassar scandal.
From the defense to strike the letters that are legally relevant, and I don't think that if a gymnast is talking.
I've always prided myself on trying to keep and protect my gymnasts at all costs, which is another reason why I've struggled with the claims made against me. The thought that I may have ignored young women who were hurting and in pain and needed help at times has been a
It was back in February. A jury found the 65-year-old guilty of lying to an officer during the investigation into sexual assaults committed by Nasser. Now, he was convicted after two former gymnasts testified they told her about being abused by Nasser back in 1997. Now, the judge sentenced Klages to 90 days in jail. She will also serve 18 months on probation.
It's an unprecedented primary, one during a pandemic, but we want to give you a look at some of the big races.
Lots to follow here today. Let's go to Oakland County, where there is a heated primary for county executive. In Macomb County, there's a crowded GOP race for the House seat being vacated by Paul Mitchell.
And in Wayne County, Rashida Tlaib is facing Detroit City Council President Brenda Jones. Also, prosecutor Kim Worthy is facing Bernie Sanders-backed Victoria Burton Harris. So let's get out live to our Hank Winchester. He is monitoring the polls for us this afternoon. And Hank, is everything running smoothly? Have there been any problems or issues?
And Everett, Karen, there have been a few issues. We just talked with Secretary Benson about those problems, mainly in the city of Detroit. About 6 different locations this morning, voters making their way to cast their ballot, only to find out that there were no poll workers, no volunteers. We are told that issue has now been corrected. They've been able to cast their ballot. We're here in the city of Detroit, where we had an opportunity to meet with the Secretary. A pretty strong turnout, actually, in person here for a primary election day, but a huge turnout absentee-wise, more than 1.5 million ballots already in, and that process of counting those getting underway. As you make your way inside to vote, you are not required to wear a mask, but it is strongly encouraged. Hand sanitizer is in place. The pen that you get is the pen that you will keep throughout the day. That is yours to leave once you vote. The Secretary did talk about the different procedures being put in place to make sure that everybody is safe, and here's what she had to say.
Oh, it's been really great to see all across the state, exactly as we had hoped. People voted early, people are getting their ballots in on time, and people are voting in person, but when they show up, you see not a lot of crowds, not a lot of lines, and a lot of protocol in place, people wearing masks, gloves, and hand sanitizer to make sure that everything's going smoothly and no one has to risk their health in order to vote today.
Masks are available at all locations once you make your way inside. If for some reason you show up not wearing one, hand sanitizer is in place. Everything is being done to make this process as safe as possible. However, as we did mention, there have been a few issues, mainly sporadic, throughout the city of Detroit, mainly with poll workers just not being there on time this morning. But if you encounter any issues as you make your way out to vote today, I want to hear from you. There are many different ways you can get in touch with our Help Me Hank team. We're going to be out and about until the polls close at 8 o'clock. So if you have an issue, let us know about it. For now, we're live here this noon in Detroit. Hank Winchester, Help Me Hank.
All righty, Hank, thank you for the update. We are learning more about the Southgate School District's plan for reopening schools in the fall. The school board voted last night to start their school year remotely, and we're told the original plan was for in-person instruction.
Turning our attention to the weather, and let's take a quick look at our forecast with Brandon as we take a live look at the radar over the area. Brandon, how long is the wet weather going to stick around?
Well, today should be the end of it, and believe it or not, our local weather is sort of tied to the big tropical storm to our east. The quicker that moves out of the way, the quicker our weather improves. So could be worse, could be better, that's for sure. Mostly 60s out there, although Metro 74, a little bit of sun trying to bust through in Romulus. This live look in Ann Arbor, where it's 67. North-northwest winds are 5 to 15, and temps low to middle 70s for the rest of the day. And yes, a few scattered showers out there. East-siders closer to the big lakes where we have bigger temperature differences. That's where we could and will see some of the heavier showers as we're seeing over Lake Huron. Also want to be careful for some lakeshore flooding there. So the big storm, a 12-hour loop just to show you how fast this thing is moving. Over the last 12 hours, it has gone through about 5 states. I know it's the mid-Atlantic, and they're not as big as our Midwestern states, but still a fast-moving storm that is right on the fringe of New York City as we speak. And this thing, a tropical storm, Isaias, which is a strong tropical storm with 70 to 90 mile an hour winds, and it is moving north-northeast at 35 miles an hour. Later tonight, it is already up into the deep woodlands of New England, and then tomorrow pushing even farther to the north up into Canada. So that is the latest on Tropical Storm Isaias. We mentioned that it is well into Canada tomorrow. That opens the gates for sunshine for us and how temperatures respond coming up.
All right, Brett, and as you said, Isaias is no longer a hurricane, but still causing damage with high winds and flash flooding as it moves up the East Coast. These are live pictures of New York City, which is right in the storm's path. Isaias spawned tornadoes and dumped rain after making landfall as a hurricane in North Carolina, where it just piled up boats against the docks and caused floods and fires that displaced dozens of people.
And we have learned that at least one person was killed when one of its twisters hit a mobile home park, and an outage led to an issue with a nuclear plant. Jay Gray is in Wilmington, North Carolina for us this afternoon with the latest on this very fast-moving storm.
Hey there, and amazing to see. We're actually getting a break in some of the clouds here and a bit of sunshine peeking through. Wouldn't have thought that last night when the wind was intense here, ripping apart areas, driving rains causing flash flooding as the storm made landfall about 40 miles to the south. Now it's continuing to move up the East Coast and still delivering that rain, delivering harsh winds, and will for the next day and a half. It's a fast-moving storm, but it's going to cover a lot of ground as it moves inland. And of course, it is hitting right now during the pandemic. This is something that emergency teams have never really had to deal with, and they're having changed the way they handle evacuees at shelters.
Shelters will screen people for coronavirus symptoms. If someone has COVID-19 or shows symptoms, they'll be directed to a sheltering option for isolation or medical attention.
This is also for some of those rescue teams, the Swiftwater Rescue and teams that move into some of the damaged areas, to rethink their strategy. Smaller groups moving in and trying to help out. Look, it's something they're learning on the fly, and they'll have to continue to learn as this storm continues its push to the north. That's the latest here in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm Jay Gray. Back to you now.
All right, always appreciate it. Thank you, James. Stick with Local 4 and click on Detroit.com for everything you need to know about this storm and its impact.
All right, let's turn our attention now to the coronavirus. More than 83,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19 in Michigan since testing started back in March. And as of Monday afternoon, the state reports 604 new cases and 6 more lives lost. The state has now ordered COVID-19 testing for agricultural and migrant workers, and there have been 11 outbreaks at farms and food processing plants in recent weeks. The University of Michigan says students must go through a 14-day period of enhanced social distancing before returning to campus this fall. And Michigan State is urging students with only online classes to consider living at home. Also, in-person voting and committee hearings are canceled this week at the state capitol after Republican State Senator Tom Barrett tested positive for the virus. So to come here on Local 4 News at noon, can COVID fatigue be a real thing?
Find out what experts believe it is and what you can do to ease some of the stress. Plus, out of control, why experts are saying the impact of the coronavirus will be felt for decades.